My name is Joshua Teplitsky. I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program here at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's a pleasure to welcome such a full room of people to what is certain to be a timely talk on Purim and local Purim in early modern Italy. We're very, very lucky to have Martina here. And by here, I don't mean this evening, I mean with us for what I hope is a 2-year period. And if it has to be shorter, then we'll wish you only good things then. But we're very, very lucky to have Martina with us for this 2-year period. Martina is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Global Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania, that's right here, and the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia. She's under the supervision in her postdoc of some guy named Joshua Teplitsky and Matteo Alcalac. She earned a double PhD in history and Jewish studies from the University of Roma Tre and the University of Hamburg, and has received fellowships from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the University of Oxford, Harvard University, the University of Göttingen, the American Jewish Archives, and the Rothschild Foundation, among others. She's the author of a lovely book called Living Under the Evil Pope, the Hebrew Chronicle of Pope Paul IV, by Benjamin Nehemiah ben El-Natan from Civitanova Marche. Which was published by Brill in 2020, as well as several articles on Jewish cultural and religious history in the early modern and modern periods. And she's currently working on her second book, which is going to be a biography of the historian and bibliophile, an important intellectual for the shaping of Jewish studies by the name of Isaiah Zone. But we're going to have to wait. We don't get to hear about him tonight, although hopefully he'll appear somewhere. Nothing at all. You'll have to come back at another time to hear that part of Martina's work. Oh, good. Okay, we'll see him somewhere. That's very good. Because this evening, Martina will be speaking to us again about Purim and local Purims in early modern Italy. I want to just acknowledge, first, you as an audience. We're getting ever closer to spring break, which often means that people are scarcer and scarcer on campus, but clearly this talk is a greater draw than spring break itself. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Martina, for giving us a reason to be together. I want to thank the supporters for this event. This event is put on as a part of the Kuchin seminar series in the Jewish Studies program, which honors Mel and Mitzi Kuchin. And it's done in collaboration with partners around the room, the Center for Italian Studies, the Department of History, Global Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and the Department of Religious Studies. I've already taken up too much time, so please join me in welcoming you.
So thank you very much, Josh, for this great introduction. Just allow me a few words to thank some people. So first of all, Josh, because for his support, the support he's giving me through my time here at Penn, which I'm really enjoying. And I really want to thank Chrissy for the amazing work she has done, for her patience with me since I arrived a year before. So many people, Steve Weitzman is not here, and Marcy and Arthur and Natalie. So they are really great people, and I really love being at the CAT Center. I really want to thank all the colleagues from among permanent staff of the CAT Center and CATS fellows who are visiting this year. I'm really enjoying the discussions and intellectual exchanges at the CAT Center. And also the Italian Studies Department, Eva Del Soldato is here, and other wonderful people I had the pleasure to meet during the years, and especially this year here in Philadelphia. And of course, all of you who participated and came here really approaching the spring break. You're not on vacation. So I really appreciate you took the time to come here today to listen about Purim. And also to the people online, which I cannot see, but I'm really thankful for your participation and for your interest in this talk. So I will start with this. So for me, hope without memory is like memory without hope. Just as man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. If dreams reflect the past, hope summons the future. Does this mean that our future can be built on a rejection of the past? Surely such a choice is not necessary. The two are not incompatible. The opposite of the past is not the future, but the absence of future. The opposite of the future is not the past, but the absence of the past. The loss of one is equivalent to the sacrifice of the other. So Elie Wiesel's words from his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1986 undoubtedly carry a universal meaning, resonating across times and experiences. But to me, as a historian studying the past of the Jewish communities in Italy, in a context of ghettoization from the 16th century to the 19th century, these words strike me as particularly poignant. The tie between hope and memory is a strong one, and recurs throughout Jewish literature, miscellaneous documents, cultural artifacts, but nowhere, I think, is stronger than in the celebration of Purim. There are so many beautiful documents, manuscripts, Esther scrolls, artifacts related to Purim that were produced in certain times and geographical areas. Probably like an entire course on Purim will not be enough because there are indeed lots of materials. So today I will just limit myself to offer some glimpses on what Purim was and how it was celebrated. Purim Italian cultural traditions from in the age of ghettoization from the 16th century to the 19th century, to the second half of the 19th century, when Italy was unified and ghettos were dismantled. And toward the end of my presentation, I'm going to reflect on what historians call local Purims, or Purim shenì, or Purim katan. So there were special celebrations set by communities or families or individuals to celebrate a commemoration of a salvation that occurred in very specific times from very specific threats. That could have been pogroms, that could have been sieges or illness or plague and natural disasters like earthquakes and fires, floods, whatever. So I'm going to start with Paul IV because it was really it was the subject of my PhD thesis. But also because with Paul IV, everything changed. So Paul IV's pontificate, starting in 1555, radically changed the relations between Jews and Christians in the state of the church and in Italy in general. So Paul IV was Gian Pietro Carafa. He was elected in May 1555. And a couple of months later, in July 1555, he issued the most terrible bull against the Jews. So the communis absurdum. Since it is absurd that Jews and Christians live together, we need to do something about that. So we established the ghettos. So the ghetto of Rome was established in 1555, but also in other cities on the state of the church that you can see. It's the purple region here in the map. And so lots of other, in every city, so there was imposition for the city to establish a ghetto to restrict all the Jews there. The ghetto of Venice was already existing because it was established in 1516. But we will say that the main ghettos were those in the state of the church. So Rome, Ancona, Bologna, and later other cities that didn't belong to the state of the church, like Ferrara, etc. So what happened? That we need to, so the communis absurdum was basically dismantling Jewish life in the city of Rome and other cities. And it was restricting Jews from, prohibiting Jews from doing some specific jobs and from interacting with Christians and going out of the ghetto at a certain time. So it basically redefined the whole existence of the Jews and put them at the fringes of society in very marginal spaces. So we have this kind of a situation of isolation. But So among the many restrictions, there was the very important one was the prohibition of interaction. So this meant that Jews, and so in the bull explicitly says that Jews and Christians cannot eat together, they cannot drink together, they cannot have any kind of relation. And we know from archival documentation from the time that Jews and Christians also had sexual intercourse, and they had constant relations out of the ghetto. So this is a very important element in this story of Purim. This is actually Giulio Morosini. In 1683, he wrote the Derech Emunah. So Giulio Morosini was a convert from Venice. We are not in Rome anymore, we're in Venice, in 1683. So in the Derech Emunah, it tells explicitly that Jews are celebrating what it calls the Jewish carnival. So during this time, Jews and Christians were in the city and they were celebrating their carnival. So we need to, just to give you, a very basic explanation. Today is Mardi Gras. So Christians are celebrating their carnival today. And Jews are gonna do that next week. So usually the Christian carnival ends a little bit before the start of Purim. So this means that tomorrow it's gonna be Ash Wednesday and Lent is gonna be starting. And so this means that in the city, Jews were celebrating, drinking wine and having food and dressing up and have fun in the city, while the city itself was shutting down because of Lent. And this was something unacceptable, not acceptable for the Pope, was not acceptable for the local authorities. And so it was very clear in documents like that, like notifications from the Cardinal Vicar in Rome, this is not Venice, it's Rome, that Jews were prohibited from hosting dances and parties in their houses and invite the Christians. What does it mean? It means that this was a practice. So Jews and Christians were celebrating Purim together until a certain year or a certain point, when the cardinal and the Inquisition had to intervene to stop this. And so in this notification from 1755, it is explicitly said that Jews will be subjected to physical punishment, and the Roman Inquisition will intervene if Jews will not stop from, inviting Christians in their houses to have food and to have dances and to dress up and celebrate Purim. So we need to understand these notifications, these orders, also in the general context of the carnival in general, and the Roman carnival in particular, because Jews were very important actors of the Roman carnival since the Middle Ages. So they were subjected to rituals of humiliation and violence, physical violence. So we have evidence from a manuscript from the Vatican Library from the 14th century that Jews were subjected to this cruel ritual of the barrel, which, so the eldest Jew of the Roman Jewish community was put inside a barrel filled with nails, and then this barrel was thrown down Monte Testaccio in Rome until the Jew would die. So this cruel ritual took place for several years or centuries, we don't know exactly, until the Pope decided to replace this ritual with the payment of 300 florins, as far as I remember, plus 30 florins in memory of Judas. To pay for the masses. So they had this kind of irony in Rome. The other very important ritual that took place, it's, also Montaigne, when he visited Rome, he experienced that, and he wrote in his diary that Jews were forced to run the Palio degli Ebrei, so the race, naked, down the Via del Corso. And of course, they were order to pay lots of taxes for the organization of the carnival games in Rome, in Piazza Navona, so in Agone e Testaccio. So they were the places, the squares, the main squares of carnival, where carnival took place in Rome. And we also have evidence of the performance of giudiate. So giudiate were theatrical plays that were usually staged on carts, like itinerant carts moving around the city in the main squares of Rome, or they were staged on in private theaters in the houses of several princes and noble people in Rome, or in the gardens. And so sometimes the Roman population could squeeze into these gardens and look at these plays, basically mocking the Jews and their rituals, their costumes, imitating funerals, other Jewish traditions. So this is just to have, a historical context of where we place Purim, where we place Carnival, where we place the Jews inside the Christian Carnival. The story of Esther influenced deeply the Italian culture, not just because Jews and Christians were together and they were often involved in rituals and traditions about Carnival and Purim, but also because the figure of Esther became for Italian women a model of moral virtue. So she's the woman, a strong woman who plays a very important role for the salvation of her people. And on the opposite, Ahasuerus' wife, Vashti, is the disobedient wife. So Esther becomes a very important figure. And there we can find beautiful examples of the cycle of Esther, the stories of the Book of Esther in art and literature. So here, just to give you a very beautiful scene by Jacopo del Selaio, was a Florentine artist whose paintings can be seen in the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. So he recounted the story of Esther, and here we can see the banquet of Ahasuerus, so the king of Persia, for all the citizens of Shushan in Persia, which actually doesn't look like Shushan, it's more like Florence in the Renaissance. And so here the king orders his wife, Vashti, to be called to attend the banquet and show off her beauty. But she refused that. So she declines the invitation. So the king doesn't know exactly what to do. He stands on the right side of this painting to consult with his dignitaries and understand how to deal with her because she declined the invitation. And here, on the contrary, we see the banquet of Vashti, who invites all the women of the palace in Shushan. And because Vashti refuses to attend Ahasuerus' banquet, she is disowned and banished from the palace after she's been stripped of all her honor and wealth. A young woman, a beautiful woman named Esther, who kept her Jewish identity secret, she's chosen to be the king's new wife. So when the royal counselor Haman or Aman persuades the king to order a decree to destroy the Jews, the Jew Mordechai urges his cousin Esther to reveal her identity and Haman's plot to the king. So here we have the triumph of Mordechai. The king and Ahasuerus and Esther go to see Mordechai to thank him for his loyalty and make him his new advisor. And meanwhile, Haman and his sons get hanged on the gallows that he prepared for Mordechai and all the Jews. And if you see on the left side of the painting, outside of the city walls, you will see a figure hanging, representing the downfall of the man who tried to destroy the Jews. So Haman. So Haman inspired also Dante Alighieri, who plays him in the Divine Comedy in the 17th. Yeah, I see Marco nodding. Yeah, we see in the Divine Comedy in the Purgatory. And Haman here, and by Dante, is defined as a crucified, although it was really hanged on a tree. Here also in the Sistine Chapel, we have a representation of a man on what seems like a trunk of a tree. And of course, in manuscripts. And so in the Hebrew manuscript here on the left, I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes. So it's here a pen, and we have the hanging of a man and his 10 sons. And this is also a tradition in Jerusalem. I know people in Jerusalem saw it probably passing on the way to the campus because it's very close to Mea Shearim, but from the part of where the tram passes by, the Rakevet. So there are representations of this kind every day. This day during Purim time. So on Purim, Jews observe several mitzvot. So the main one is the Mikra Megillah. So the reading of the Megillah, which needs to happen in the synagogue. The second one is to have a sumptuous feast, a festive meal with good food and wine. So this is that Purim. And the third one is to send in lots, give gifts of food or money or drinks to neighbors, friends, and so on, and relatives, people in the family, so the Mishloach Manot. And finally, the Matanot Levionim, so give food or money to the needy ones. So because the Mikra Megillah, so the reading of the Megillah is so important, we have hundreds. We are so fortunate to have hundreds of Megillot that survived. And they are digitized in many libraries, by many libraries, so you can see online. I just brought this, I'm not a art historian, so I'm not gonna talk about the beautiful descriptions of the Megillot, which on the contrary, you can read anything by Shalom Sabar, who wrote extensively about the beauty of these pieces of art and culture. So here we have a Megillah from the Hebrew College, the Cloud Library in Cincinnati, from the 17th century. And usually when these Megillot are very widely decorated and very richly illustrated, they come from Venice. So most of times. So Venetian Jews had a particular taste for decorations, and you see flowers and animals. Very beautiful colors. So this is another example also from Venice. This is the big, the 4 columns on the central part of the Megillah. But there are also very different styles, like more sober scrolls, ink, parchment, with just a few motifs, like floral motifs. But these Megillot are also important for us because we understand the culture in the family, the value of culture in the family, and we have ownership notes sometimes, and we have a colophon of the scribes, so we can understand better what was like Australian degree of literacy and culture in general. For example, this one comes from Modena, it's from 1606 and belongs to Yoshua ben Shmuel Sanguine or Sanguini, one of the two. We have very different styles, also white, pretty white, pretty sober. But the very important thing is that we have anthropomorphic, like representations in this kind of Megillot, because like in contrast to the Bible, like the Megillot could be drawn, like human figures could be represented. So it is very beautiful to look at these pieces of art. So I really encourage you to look at beautiful descriptions and digitization facsimile editions from the National Library of Israel on Ktiv. There are really hundreds and hundreds of Megillot to look at. So I want to pause just a bit on these two beautiful Megillot because both were produced by women, young women. So the first one comes to the left, comes from the Braginski collection in Zurich as a private collection. And it was copied by Stellina Bat-Menachem, but by Ben-Yotiel from Venice. And it was copied and finished on the 15th of February, 1564. And it is believed to be the earliest dated completed Megillah fully decorated. The second one is the Megillah copied by Luna, daughter of Yehuda Ambron, which was a very important family from the ghetto of Rome. And she was only 14. She completed the Megillah in 1767. So she didn't decorate that, she completed the text. We don't know exactly who did the decoration for both Megillot, very different in style, from two geographical areas completely different, one from Venice, one from Rome. So the one from Rome is now at the Israel Museum, was bought by the Israel Museum 2 years ago at Kedem auction. And next year is gonna be, for those who will be in Jerusalem, the Israel Museum, there's gonna be this wonderful exhibition by Ananitha Kaplan, who is the curator of Hebrew manuscripts, and she's Italian. So she will organize this next year. And of course, we come to the our manuscript here at Penn, who is not here on campus. You need to go to the CAT Center. So this is a very beautiful manuscript, which I had the pleasure to meet in November because it was displayed here at Bumpelt in the Kislak Center. It's a very beautiful manuscript, but it's very small. It is something like that. It's a very beautiful one. It's a very important one because it's one of the earliest books. It's not a scroll. It is a codex. So it is very unusual. So there are, I mean, it's from the 14th century. So the unusual thing is also, it's very early, earlier than the other Megillot we've seen in the slides. And it was something that was probably after, maybe you can say lots of things about that, but it's a book that was created for someone who had to follow the reading of the Megillah. It was not a scroll intended to be read in the synagogue. It was something that someone was, browsing during the reading of the Megillah for his own pleasure, for his own, reading. Yeah, so if you want to look, if you want to have a close up on this manuscript, you can really look at it online. So there is the facsimile edition. And there is also a very nice video with Dot Porter. So the codex, the copy with the codex book series. So the Book of Esther, you will find it on YouTube. Dot Porter is a curator here at Bumpelt. Yeah, so it's really beautiful. You can see all the beautiful tiny animals, porcupines and birds and different kinds. I don't know how many different kinds of birds are presented in this. It's only 16 leaves, but it's so beautiful. So really enjoy that if you can. So of course, when Italian people are obsessed with food, this is something very cliche, but it's true. And Italian Jews were not different. So we have lots of traditions and manuscripts and different kinds of archival materials we can find online and on site. We have lots of information about what kind of food was prepared or what kind of things people were eating or drinking for Purim. So I brought you this example of a Judeo-Italian sonnet that's from JTS Library manuscript 4104. And it's a Judeo-Italian sonnet. So it means that it's written in Italian. It is Italian, but it's Hebrew. So it's Italian Hebrew characters. So at the end of every verse, we have a word in Hebrew. Not every time, but sometimes we do. And this is something coming from Croatia, like Dubrovnik was under the influence of Venice. So Venetian traditions were really resonating here in the sonnet. So this sonnet is a praise to God. There explanations about what Purim is, what happened to Aman, and what happened to the Jews, what Jews need to do to celebrate Purim. So yeah, I will give you an example of that. So the stanzas are talking about, these are the central stanzas of the poem, of the sonnet, in which basically they say, you know, we need to celebrate because Jews, Mordechai and Esther defeated Haman, and therefore we need to celebrate that. How? With food. Like we need to have good wine and bread. Of course, they cannot be missed on a Jewish table, but also with ofot, chickens or birds. And we know that in Venice there were, like, Venetian Jews were eating pheasants or other kinds of smaller birds, and marzipan. So marzipan is a Venice thing. So because it comes from marcispani, so it's the St. Mark's bread. And then we have, when I found this in the Hebrew text, in the Judeo-Italian was like, there are also bozzolai and confettini. So I didn't know this bozzolai, and bozzolai is bussolai. So the bussolai of Burano, which is a city, an island very close to Venice. And these bussolai are small biscuits in the shape of a donut that sometimes can also be fried. So, you know, this is also a tradition of a carnival, fry everything, whatever you can. And the confettini, which are not the confetti, but they are related to that. So the confetti, this dragée, were usually thrown by the windows, from the balconies of the noble people at the poor population in Venice. And so this is the use of throwing confetti, the paper confetti comes from there. And it's the same word. And then at the end of at the very end of this poem, after the Birkat Hamazon, after thanking God for all the beautiful and delicious food we have, then it's time to have liquors, several sorts of liquors. And apparently that's something very interesting that, you know, I didn't bring it here in the slide because of course I'm not certain what kind of liquor they were drinking. But in the early modern period in Venice, something was very popular, was Mistra. So the Mistra is something is very similar to arak, raki, or ouzo, because everything was connected. So it is so incredible that, you know, we can think about what these people were eating and drinking in the 17th, 18th century. They were not very far from, you know, what the Mediterranean is today. Another beautiful example of, you know, festive Purim traditions is the one from Livorno. So it's a piyut from Livorno, Fate onore al bel Purim, and it's very famous. So I will give you just a taste of this song from a recording from 1954. So we are going to listen to that together. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this version was recorded in 1954 by Rav Eliot Oaf, who was the chief rabbi of Rome from 1951 to 2002, a very long rabbinate. And this beautiful thing just mentions very beautiful things like, you know, what kind of very specific kinds of food that were eaten during Purim. So we have here, so this is not my translation, this is something I found online, but I like the fact that it was already, you know, Hebrew, like Judeo-Italian, Italian, and, you know, English. So Red Today is a very misogynistic song, because basically this guy is telling women, go in the kitchen, go and prepare all the desserts of Purim, because it's time to do that. Don't stay here, don't spend time talking, chatting, and do some work with my sewing things. Just go in the kitchen and prepare this, because it's very important. So he mentions this fate torte sinaini, so make these cakes and sinaini. So the sinaini are these biscuits in the shape of a little mountain from the Mount Sinai. And they are almond cookies, and their recipes, like these Jewish recipes, are made today. So I found them on a blog of an Italian-American woman who's making all these Jewish traditions from Italy from that time. Then we have these cuboletti and moscardini. So these cuboletti are these gobeletti. Cuboletti comes from Liguria, so which is very close to Livorno in a way. And they were filled with apple jam or other fruit, apricots, whatever. And moscardini clearly are not octopus cakes, like it was translated, because of course octopus is not kosher, but they are moscardini, so almond cookies. So it's another variety of toasted almonds cookies. Yeah, so this was just something for fun. Yeah, and the other thing is that I don't know if anyone is writing a sonnet or poem or story about the Dubai pistachio chocolate amantashen, which apparently viral in Israel at the moment. So, if you want to write something, it's the moment. Please do that. Yeah, so we said so the story of Purim inspired, vast literature, and also food and drinks inspired, a vast Purim literature, and especially the Masechet Purim by Canonimus ben Canonimus, who visited Rome in the 14th century, and he probably took inspiration in this festive atmosphere of Rome to write his Megillat Esther or Masechet Purim, which is basically just a parody of Purim. And this tractates, it's 4 chapters written in the style of a Talmudic tractate. But everything is upside down, and the stories are not exactly about Purim. The stories are about a king of vineyards. And so it's in him to get drunk and eat and excess, like in everything. And of course, Purim inspired the development of the theater. So from the Purim Spielen, so the production and performance of local theatrical plays, that clearly with the development of the theater in Venice in the 17th century, began a genre. So lots of plays. I cannot really enter into detail about that. I think it would be another 2 lectures. But yeah, and also there are wonderful works by Maria Luisa Meyer-Modena and Claudia Rosenzweig on the Italian traditions of Purim Spiel and the development of Italian theater in the Baroque. So Leon Modena, for example, wrote the Esther and was published in 1619 and was performed in the ghetto and theaters all around Venice. So, it is a tradition. And of course, Carnival in Venice and theater get along, and it was really, something, it was an exciting moment of the time to be in Venice, and still is, though it's super crowded. So I want to bring you a very last thing about, Purim traditions in the early modern times. So I found this letter a couple of days ago, and it was really fun, because basically this child, we don't know exactly how old he was a child asking for a Purim gift from his grandfather in Mantua in 1703. And so he asked his father, שתיתן לי בידך הטובה והרחבה עליי מאות פורים, כדי לשמוח גם אני בהם בשמחת פורים, ולקנות כסת סופרים, וגם לצחוק עם הנערים, כמו שהורו לנו המורים שאין מדקדקים במאות פורים. So that your generous hand will give me money, meot Purim, so I can enjoy them on Purim, Simchat Purim. Use them to buy ink. So maybe this child was writing lots of letters, I don't know. Or maybe was copying a book, I don't know. And then he said, I also want to have fun with my buddies, with my guys. As our sages instructed us not to be strict with the money for Purim, meot Purim. And so this is a reference to Yosef Karo Orach Chaim, which this child was a student and knew very well. So I talk until now about local expressions of local traditions from Venice, from Mantua, from Livorno, from Rome. But now I'm going to talk about what historians call local Purims, which are not exactly this. So a local Purim is...
Can you just click the... It's all gone.
Sorry.
The AI was listening.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the local Purims. So Josh brought this book. Yeah, right. Which is a great book, and it's a very engaging book. I find very illuminating when I was writing my PhD. It's a book by Elliot Horowitz, so Purim, Reckless Rights, Purim and the Legacy of Jewish Violence. And one of the two chapters of the book are dedicated to the local Purims. So Purims, meaning Purim, local Purim, or Purim shenì, or Purim katan, which is a Purim that doesn't happen on Purim. It's a Purim that doesn't happen on the 14th of Adar, but happens on a very specific time to celebrate a very specific, event of salvation from a threat. So we have for local Purims recorded in Italy, but also all over the world. So I'm not gonna talk about, all the events, and because there are so many, and I think there is not, so far there is not a classification of all the Purims that have been recorded so far. And also this didn't happen for Italy yet. So there are works, ongoing research. So since 20 years, I would say that this kind of phenomenon of local Purims in Italy became very important. So historians are working on that. So Davide Mano is also working on a comprehensive book of local Purims that will be forthcoming in the next few years. So we have evidence about many local Purims. So for example, in Casale Monferrato, so when the Spanish were sieging Piedmont, so we have a Purim about that. Ancona, so we have the earthquake of Ancona, we have the fire in Padua in 1795, and also occasions in which the Christian population was attacking the Jews for a reason or for an alleged blood libel. And so there was the case of Rome in 1993, was during the French Revolution in Rome. And so the Jews were accused of being Philo-French, supporting the revolution. And for this reason, the Roman populace was supporting the Pope. And so he went to siege the ghetto in 1793. And they tried to burn the ghetto on stage, they burned the ghetto completely, but they didn't succeed because of rain. And so because of that, Jews recorded that as a local Purim. So it means that the local community was writing a new Megillah to remember the specific event. And every year they were celebrating this event and were commemorating the event with particular commemoration in the synagogue. And again, they were not eating all the stuff we saw, and they were not drinking, but they were reading this. They were reading the Megillah, the local Purim every year. So I want to say that. So I want to talk finally about very briefly about my book. So it was my PhD. It was about the Divrei Hayamim shel Epiphany Paolo Revi, Annikrat Latino. So it was the Chronicle of Pope Paul IV by a moneylender from Civitano La Marche, who was arrested with other people from the very small community of Civitanova Marche, who was arrested by the Roman Inquisition and taken into chains to Rome on a 7-day trip to Rome, like on foot. So in this chronicle, I mean, this chronicle is not a Megillat Purim. It's not explicitly a local Purim, but it has to do with Purim. And I say that because there are several instances in the book, I mean, not several, many instances in the book in which Aman and Amalek are remembered throughout. So I would say that so the main antagonist of the story, of course, is Paul IV. So the Pope, who, as I said at the very beginning, was the Pope who established the ghetto. He issued a communimis absurdum. He made the life of Jews in Italy very bitter. So when he was dying, I was approaching his death in August 1559. And he exiled his cardinal nephew. So the Pope had several nephews, and at some point who was angry with the nephew was Carlo Carafa, here in the slide, and he banned him from Rome. What happened? Before he died, he tried to reconcile with his nephew, and he asked him to go back to Rome to see him and depart from him. But when he arrived in Rome, it was too late. So Benjamin writes in the chronicle that Aman, Carlo Carafa, remaining Carlo Carafa, the cardinal, came back. He came back to Rome, but he did not have the opportunity to see his uncle, nor did that wicked man, so the uncle, to see his nephew. So both of their burning bodies may be hung on a tree and their souls roasted in the fire, which is a reference to the hanging of Aman in the scroll of Esther. In other places, there is also another case in which he says that Haman is the neophyte from Civitanova Marche, who was basically the person who accused the Jews of having tried to convert a Franciscan friar to Judaism. And this neophyte also said lots of things against the Jews. He was plotting against them, and he was the person who was responsible for the intervention of the Roman Inquisition in Civitanova and the arrest of the Jewish community, including the author. So, like, the evil people are always Aman. They're always named Aman. Very interesting, the real Aman in the story is named Amalek. So, because Amalek is the first enemy of the Israeli people, in the Bible. So he said in the chronicle that when he died, I mean, throughout the chronicle, there are lots of curses against the Pope, Imach Shmo v'zichrono, and so may his memory and name be blotted out, etc., etc. And this memory, the erasure of memory, was not just meant as a symbolical erasure, because when Paul IV died, for real, everything, his memory was erased completely from Rome. So he died in August. The day after he died, the coat of arms of the family Carafa and all the statues of Paul IV and all kinds of paintings of Paul IV were destroyed by the people, the Roman people, because the Roman people were very angry. And during the vacancy, when the Pope dies, there are some instances throughout the history of the Catholic Church in which the people came to store completely the Vatican and the buildings, the Catholic churches, and because they wanted to destroy completely the memory of the Pope and that pontificate. So that was the case of Paul IV, because Paul IV was a very unpopular Pope. He was the Pope who re-established the Roman Inquisition in 1542. First he was the head of the Inquisition before he became Pope. He was also the Pope who burned the Talmud in 1553, before he became Pope. He was the Pope who issued the communimis absurdum in 1555. And he is the Pope who also established the Index of the Forbidden Books. So it was not a very friendly person, not for the Jews, not for the Christians. And also during his pontificate, there were lots of wars. And the Roman population, like Christian population, was heavily influenced, impacted by the wars and heavy taxes on meat, on salt. So there was famine, there were different, there was the flood of the river, of the Tiber. So it was a very difficult pontificate. But for our chronicler in 1559, this was the sign that for real, Paul IV was Amalek, and he was a predecessor of Aman, which is indeed the truth also according to the Bible. So yeah, I want to finish my presentation with another kind of Purim. So the family Purims. So here we have, I brought you something. So it's from the Isaiah Zone collection from the Ben Smith Institute Library in Jerusalem. And it's some notes I found. It's a family chronicle that I found in Italian with some verses, psukim in Hebrew, but most of it is in Italian. And I found it within a machazor, so a prayer book of Italian Jews that was printed in 1750 in Venice by the Samperia Bragadina. And so basically it's something just at the end of the fly leaves of this machazor. There is a complete story written by a family member, so a member of the family Montel from Piemonte, so from Cuneo. And this Salvatore, or Yoshua Montel, writes the local Purims in his family. So what happened exactly in his family? So it gives lots of explanations and very detailed information about this child, who was probably either his son or his nephew. It's not very clear. But he said this poor young Lelio was a very unfortunate child, I must say. In 1858, this young Lelio was spared from a worm infection. And therefore, we need to celebrate this as a day of joy in the family. And we need to record it in our calendars. And, every year, we're going to celebrate this event for us because God performed a miracle. But then the miracle happened the same year again. In 1858, that year, on Yom Kippur, this child or youngster, we don't know, he swallowed a chestnut. But thank God he didn't choke. He survived. And so, it was fine. Despite Yom Kippur, he was eating a chestnut, but he survived. So we need to, again, he said, Yoshua Montel said, we need to remember this day. Several years later, in 1867, again, this poor man fell in the street at night. And then a coach was passing by with 2 horses. But thank God, nothing bad happened to him because the horses didn't really strike him. I didn't put it in the slide, but the same guy, a couple of months later, fell ill with a terrible fever and was about to die. But thank God also that time was saved. And so he survived. And we need to thank God for this miracle, for the many miracles that happened to the Montel family. And to be true, also the same Salvatore Montel, so Yoshua Montel, was going to Turin from Cuneo. It was on a coach until the coach had a crash. And so in this incident with another coach, he survived. No one reported injuries. And so we need to thank God because of that. Where he was going to celebrate the Christian carnival in Turin. So this is, I find it very interesting that was really the case, going to celebrate the carnival. Everything is going up again, Okay, so I just want to end my presentation here by saying that I think without the memorialization of the salvation from danger and death and threats through the reading of the Megillah and the observance of Purim mitzvot, year after year, century after century, the story of Esther would have been just a story, one of the many stories in the Bible. But through its rituals, songs, food, drinks, masquerades, dances, plays, for Italian Jews, it became an expression of joy and hope against the local Aman, against the local Amalek. And all these landowners who try to destroy the Jews throughout the history of the Italian, early modern Italy. As Italian Jews confined within the walls of the ghetto, they were frequently faced with papal and local decrees of expulsions and prohibitions of any sort. Their precarious fate could suddenly turn from one day to another, which resonates well with the fortunate turn in Esther's story. The imitation of Purim scrolls through local and family Purims by Italian Jews testifies to the centrality of the narrative in the fragile political landscape that characterized early modern Italy. To conclude, I believe the story of Purim is a story of hope with memory and memory with hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martina. We have time for some questions. Feel free.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Listening to your talk, I'm thinking of Italy as a unified culture, but Italy wasn't unified at that time. So you have on the one hand, very different states, but also Jewish population that is Ashkenazim and Sephardim and mixed and whatever. So can you say something about the friction and tensions between the celebrations, and how does it differ, rather than thinking of Italy today looking back?
Thank you very much, Lian. Yeah, it's like in the same Rome, there were, in the time of the ghetto, there were 5 synagogues in one building, and they had everyday fights because they wanted to open a window, because they wanted to perform things in a certain way. And so every time I think about, what happens in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, it's the same thing. Like, it's a unified space, and the ghetto is very small, the building is very small, and Jews have different traditions and different costumes and prayers, languages. So it is very, unfortunately, we don't have for Rome we don't have a clear picture of what happens in a place. I mean, I say Rome because Rome was the best example. We have Ashkenazi people, we have Sephardi people, or we have the Scuola Castigliana. And so then those who claim to be the Jews from, they were taken into chains from Titus and Vespasianus in Rome. So Rome is the best example, but we don't have information about what were the carnival, the Purim traditions, and if they really overlapped or they fought one another. We don't know that. It would be interesting to do a comparative work to really study very deeply traditions from different places. But this hasn't been done so far. Yeah, thank you. I think Davida, Marina. Davida.
Thank you. It was very fascinating. So I'm trying to, what I'd like to know is, it sounds like the Pope's edict was an effort maybe to prevent Purim from being celebrated. And along with the other kinds of humiliations and violent treatment of the Jews at the time, I'm wondering whether the insistence on beautiful Megillot that you showed us, is that an act of resistance? Are there other documents that are showing some kind of tension over, should we really be celebrating it this openly? And I'm trying to put those two things together, the suppression and the joy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Davida. So I must say that there were times in which the Pope popes were issuing orders to prevent violence. So as a preventive measure or, control measure of disorder, social disorder, especially during Carnival and Purim. Mostly Carnival, because it was really like the violence was a Christian violence, and it was an institutionalized violence. So, for example, in the case of the local Purim of Rome in 1793, so the Jews were confined in the ghettos, in the ghetto of Rome for 8 days, because otherwise Christians would have attacked them. So there were several restrictions, and they were in 1793, the Pope reimposed the wearing of the distinctive badge, with the yellow cap, to prevent Christians, to prevent the fact that Jews could have been misunderstood for Christians, so they would have been disguised, and this was a form it was a form of protection in a way, yeah. I would say yes, it's a prohibition, but it was also a form of control during the disorder. About the Megillot, I don't know exactly. I mean, I would say, of course, because it was the most important mitzvah, and so people. And we have a long tradition of beautiful manuscripts and workshops in Venice, but in Rome, in other places. And we have really, if you compare the Megillot with, other geographical areas, the Italian ones really stand out many times. And also because of the use of gold, sometimes illuminated manuscripts. But they used to be Megillot used in the synagogue. Sometimes were Megillot used in the family. So I don't know. Maybe it would have been a form of resistance. I didn't study that. But it would be an interesting perspective to look at, I think. Thank you. You tell me. Carla and Bob. Yes. Okay, Carla.
Okay. First of all, I think it was a wonderful talk, and I'm grateful, Martina. Thank you. I am interested in the historical reception of this biblical story that, first of all, does not make originally Mordecai the husband, but makes Mordecai the sort of the third party of a triangular whereby he is allied with Esther, and their good sense, let's call it like that, makes the oppositional husband understand what the protocol is about. And the victory, which is the celebration of Purim, the way I understand it, comes about. So my question is sort of a simple and at the same time a very complicated question, because how does the agency of Esther change in history, even in the Italian reception? At some point, you said, put down your beautiful clothes and go in the kitchen and make the cookies for the celebration, okay? To me, it is a very interesting transformation, which is not exclusive to a Jewish tradition of reception of women's role. But it's always how a woman who is, for example, in a hermeneutical tradition, I am sure you've read Judith Plaskow. Judith Plasko has no reservation in celebrating Esther as a superlative woman, protagonist, agent, okay? Slowly in history, I've seen this too many times in too many religious traditions where women who are superlative slowly get worn out and progressively become less relevant. Did you think about this issue in this specific tradition, which is a very important tradition? Because if I want to be totally happy about Purim, I want to be happy as a woman. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting question. I think so. The Renaissance, took all the stories from the Bible and the classics and interpretation, and there was indeed a hermeneutical, effort to read and reinterpret the stories. I think here, in the story of Purim, like the opposition is really with Vashti. So really the first wife of the king. She's a disobedient wife. Why? Because she didn't want to show off her beauty. What did it mean exactly, show off the beauty in the banquet? So Esther was the other woman in the story. And I think she had to be presented to the public, to the Italian women in the Renaissance, in a way that could have been a moral woman. And the opposite, the other woman, is someone who would disobey her husband. So that's not a model that the Italian wife from the Renaissance, and we are talking about women who certainly read the Bible or who understand the Bible, and maybe they could read Latin. I don't know. We're talking about the elite. We're not talking about really the population, really the low levels of the population. I don't know. It's a very interesting question, but I think really it was a presentation of Esther that really shifted from the Megillat Esther, so from the scroll, and it became, the person in the stories, in the picture, in the paintings, and
You did say at some point she was the emblem of a moral virtue.
Yeah.
But when women start becoming emblems of moral virtue, the narrow path of them being subjected to the morals of a culture
and
is very narrow.
And then we have these songs, they're very beautiful songs, but still,
and this is what you said.
Woman.
You did say it. I acknowledge it.
It's part of the Italian culture, unfortunately.
I was going to ask something. The pictures were quite graphic of the degrading ceremonies toward Jews. Do we have any parallel writings of how Jews reacted to this that are from similar time periods?
So they acted no, I didn't get it, sorry.
Do we know anything about what Jewish writers were saying or responding to these, the races and the barrels and all this?
Yeah, well, we have information like appeals, like archival documents in which the Roman Jewish community, this was something very specific of Rome, like these rituals against the Jews and the peril and, performance of Judiate. So most of the times Jews were trying to appeal to the tribunal of the governor of Rome or several offices of governing bodies in Rome to say, we need to stop that. It's not nice for us, and it's certainly not nice that every year we need to sacrifice the eldest member of the community. So we have mostly archival documents from about this time. From this time. There are also, now I cannot really recall references in certain works, but there are mentions of Purim. Martina.
I was wondering about the local Purims and like what is the definition of Purim here, or why are they connecting to Purim? Where you mentioned that there's a man and Amalek, which would make sense when in cases where there's an antagonist, like in the political persecution, but like when someone chokes on a chestnut or has an accident. The Bible is full of salvation stories, right? So why not Passover in Egypt? Why not like any of the other miraculous acts of God? Like why did they connect specifically to Purim when there's no antagonist?
Well, because I think, the story of Purim really stayed a lot with Italian Jews. So it became really a model, even though sometimes they were not antagonists, like it was just, a fire, a disaster, something unpredictable or something, someone choking for a chestnut. But it really became a genre. So like the story of Esther became through the centuries in Italy specifically, became a genre of, to recount a salvation. So they just took it from there, and basically the tradition was to establish a new Megillah, write a new Megillah, or let's celebrate this thing in the synagogue every year. And they still do that in Rome. For example, the Purim of Rome in 1793, that it happened like a month before Purim. It was in January, the 18th of January, 1793. This fire and the rain, and then the rain stopped the fire. So Roman Jews celebrate that. And then they wrote stories about that. The Megillah, but it became a tradition.
So more about the practices, the actual practices of marking it than the textual, more abstract meaning.
It's actually related to a couple other questions. And I'll be brief, but I'm curious about representations of Esther in these local Purims. So we see how we can relate to an antagonist perhaps, but where do we see Esther, and where do we see that specifically the Jewish women?
We don't really see that. Yeah. I mean, we have in these scrolls, like in the Purim, the salvation, and this is gonna be for us like a second Purim. It's a Purim Katan, Purim Shenì, but Esther is not really the protagonist in here. Here is the miracle, and it's God who performed the miracle for different reasons, through different in different ways. But it's not really like it's a Purim without Esther, basically.
I was wondering because the Sephardic, the conversal tradition was to identify in Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula, with this essentially being forced to marry against the will, but staying faithful for a important cause, meaning the preservation of the people. And so it's an inversion of violation into making it into a good thing. I'm wondering, does that survive in Italy? Do you see or is there's a shift? I mean, for the Sephardic Jews that come after the expulsion into Italy, does that disappear, that identification in the literature?
I don't know, Arthur.
I'm sorry, the conversation about Esther made me ask that, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I didn't mean to, I'm sorry.
Two little points. One point responds to Carla a little bit to say that in the early period after the destruction of the temple, there's some research that that Purim was elevated and that the figure of Esther was elevated. And the research, I would have to dig it up, but that there was some feeling of threat from the figure of Mary. And that they wanted Esther to be a figure that, would kind of counteract Mary's influence.
Yeah.
And the second point goes to this issue of these private Megillot, or family ones, that I'm wondering the way in which that kind of thing gets handled in at least Ashkenazi Jewish tradition is to bench Gomel during a Torah service on a you know, a Saturday or a Monday or a Thursday. And that is a public acknowledgement, but it's not a private familial one. But what's interesting about recording it in a Megillah or in a book or something and making it a family occasion is that Purim is also notorious that the Megillah doesn't mention God. And so it's kind of making this salvation into something, you know, if you're doing it in your home as a private thing with this remembrance, it's different from coming and thanking God for it.
Wow.
It's crucial. It's crucial.
Usually I would stand up and say, please join us for some refreshments, but it pales in comparison to the feasts that we've seen on the screen, both material and intellectual. So please join me in thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you.
But do still please eat.